So one of my favorite things to do is speed wrap Hamilton. So that we could speed wrap the terms and conditions for a MacBook Air together today. Let's see how it goes. Okay. Got my microphone. Let's see, 20% battery. I think we'll be okay. Alright. Apple Incorporated software license agreement for Mac OS Ventura for use on Apple-rated systems. Please read this software license agreement license carefully before using the Apple software. By using the Apple software, you are agreeing to be bound by the terms of this license. If you do not agree to the terms of this license, do not install and or use the Apple software. And if presented with the option to agree or disagree to the terms, click disagree. If you acquired the Apple software as part of an Apple hardware purchase, and if you do not agree to the terms of the license, you may return the entire Apple hardware software package within the return period to the Apple Store or authorized distribution where you obtained it for a refund subject to Apple's return policy found at a link. You must return the entire hardware software package in order to obtain a refund. Important note, to the extent that the software may be used to reproduce, modify, publish, or distribute materials, it is licensed to you only for reproduction, modification, publication, and distribution of non-copyrighted materials in which you own the copyright materials you are authorized or legally permitted to reproduce, modify, publish, or distribute. If you're uncertain about your right to copy, modify, publish, or distribute any material, you should contact your legal advisor. 1. General. A. The Apple software, including boot ORM code, any third-party software, documentation, interfaces, content, fonts, and any data accompanying this license, original Apple software, as can be updated or replaced by feature enhancements, software updates, security responses, system files, or system restore software provided by Apple for your Apple-rated computer or supported peripheral device. Apple software changes, whether pre-installed in Apple-branded hardware, on internal storage, on removable media, on disk, and read-only memory, or any other media, or in any other form, the original Apple software and Apple software changes are collectively referred to as the Apple software. A license is not sold to you by Apple Incorporated for use only under the terms of this license. Apple and or Apple's licensors retain ownership of the Apple software itself and reserve all rights not expressly granted to you. You agree that the terms of the license will apply to any Apple-branded application software product that may be pre-installed on your Apple-branded hardware unless such product is accompanied by a separate license, in which case you agree that the terms of that license will govern your use of that product. Breathing break. I don't want to breathe directly on you. B. Apple, at its discretion, may make available future Apple software changes. Apple software changes, if any, may not necessarily include all existing software features or new features that Apple releases for new or other models of Apple-branded computers. The terms of the license will govern any Apple software changes provided by Apple, unless such Apple software changes are accompanied by a separate license, in which case the terms of that license will govern. C. Title and intellectual property rights in and to any content displayed or accessed through the Apple software belongs to the respective content owner. Such content may be protected by copyright or other intellectual property laws, and treaties may be subject to terms of use by the third party providing such content. Except as otherwise proved herein, this license does not grant you any rights to such content, nor does it guarantee that such content will continue to be available to you. You are prohibited from republishing, retransmitting, or reproducing any images accessed through news or maps as a standalone file. 2. Permitted license uses and restrictions. A. Pre-installed and single copy Apple software license. Subject to the terms and conditions of this license unless you obtained the Apple software from the Mac App Store through an automatic download or under a volume license, maintenance, or other written agreement from Apple. You are granted a limited, non-exclusive license to install, use, and run one copy of the Apple software on a single Apple-branded computer at one time. For example, these single copy license terms apply to you if you obtain the Apple software pre-installed in Apple-branded hardware. B. Mac App Store license. If you obtained a license from the Apple software from the Mac App Store or through automatic download, then subject to the terms and conditions of the license that is permitted by the services and content usage rules set forth in the Apple Media Services terms and conditions, you are granted a limited, non-transferable, non-exclusive license. 1. To download, install, use, and run for personal, non-commercial use, one copy of the Apple software directly on each Apple-branded computer running macOS Monterey, macOS Big Sur, macOS Catalina, macOS Mojave, macOS High Sierra, or macOS Sierra that you own or control. 2. If you're a commercial enterprise or educational institution, to download and use and run one copy of the Apple software for use either A. by a single individual on each of the Mac computers that you own or control, or B. by multiple individuals on a single shared Mac computer that you own or control. For example, a single employee may use the Apple software on both the employee's desktop Mac computer and laptop Mac computer, or multiple students may serially use the Apple software on a single Mac computer located at a resource center or library. And 3. To install, use, and run up to 2 additional copies or instances of the Apple software or any prior Mac OS or OS X operating system software or subsequent release of the Apple software within virtual operating system environments on each Apple-branded computer you own or control that is already running the Apple software for purposes of A. Software development, B. Testing during software development, C. Using macOS server, or D. Personal, non-commercial use. Except as expressly permitted in Section 3, the grant set forth in Section 2B. 3 above does not permit you to use the virtualized copies or instances of the Apple software in connection with the Surface VR, time sharing, terminal sharing, or other similar types of services. Except as expressly permitted in Section 2B, you may not use the Apple software to run any Apple operating system software, including iOS, iPad OS, Watch OS, or TV OS, and virtual operating system environments on Mac computers. C. Volume or maintenance license. If you obtain the Apple software under the terms of your volume or maintenance license will determine the number of copies of the Apple software you're permitted to download, install, use, and run on Apple-branded computers you own or control, except as agreed to in writing by Apple. The terms and conditions of this license all apply to your use of the Apple software obtained under a volume or maintenance license. D. System requirements. Apple ID. Please note that the Apple software is supported on only Apple-branded hardware that meets specified system requirements as indicated by Apple. In addition, use of and access to certain features of the Apple software and certain services as defined in Section 6 may require for you to apply for a certain username and password combination known as an Apple ID. E. Fonts. Subject to the terms and conditions of the license, you may use the fonts included with Apple software to display and print content while running the Apple software. However, you may only embed fonts and content if that is permitted by the embedding restrictions accompanying the font in question. These embedding restrictions can be found in the font book/preview/so font info panel. F. Voices, live captions. Subject to the terms and conditions of this license, you may 1. Use the system voices, including the Apple software system voices, while running the Apple software and to create your own original content and projects for your personal and commercial use. And 2. Use the live captions automatically generated on device in real time by the Apple software, whether generated during a FaceTime call or otherwise only for your personal, non-commercial use. No other use of the system voices or live captions permitted by this license, including but not limited to use, reproduction, display, performance, recording, publishing, or redistribution of any of the system voices or live captions in profit, non-profit, public sharing, or commercial context. G. Photos app features and support. The Photos application of the Apple software, Photos app, may not support some video and photo formats. Uses and features of the Photos app will depend on the features of your camera. Synchronizing photos with the Photos app in any Apple or third-party services may result in loss of data. The slideshow graphics, music, and themes included with the Photos app are only for personal, non-commercial use in slideshows you create using the Photos app. You may not use, extract, or distribute commercially or otherwise on a standalone basis any photographs, images, graphics, artwork, audio, video, or similar assets, digital materials contained within and provided as a part of the Photos app or otherwise use the digital materials outside the context of its intended use as part of the Photos app. H. Content caching features. To the extent that Apple and or its affiliates make particular software and or content available for caching, e.g. applicable content from the Mac App Store, Apple eligible content, certain features of the Apple software, the content caching features may be automatically downloaded and locally cached, such as Apple eligible content on your Apple branded computer that is running the Apple software. For purposes of the sections of the Apple branded computer is referred to as the caching enabled Mac. By using the content caching features of the Apple software, you agree that Apple may download and cache such Apple eligible content on your caching enabled Mac. You can turn off the content caching features of the Apple software at any time by going to sharing under system settings on your caching enabled Mac. 2. The content caching features of the Apple software are for use only on a caching-enabled Mac you own or control and solely for the purposes of expediting the delivery of such Apple-eligible content to authorized end users within your home company or organization. You understand that such users may need to separately authenticate with Apple prior to receiving the Apple-eligible content, and that the expedited delivery of Apple-eligible content through the use of your caching-enabled Mac will not modify the terms under which you or your end users receive such Apple-eligible content. You acknowledge and agree that all use of the Apple-eligible content is subject to the applicable license terms that govern the type of Apple-eligible content being cached. These terms may include but are not limited to the Apple Media Services Terms and Conditions, the iCloud Terms and Conditions, the iTunes U Instructor Agreement, the iTunes U Software License Agreement, and or the applicable licensing terms that accompany the software being downloaded, unless the download was accompanied by its own separate license agreement, in which case the latter would apply. A list of Apple Software License Agreements, SLAs, may be found here at this link. You acknowledge and agree that the use of the content caching features and storage of Apple-eligible content on your caching-enabled Mac does not transfer to you any rights beyond those granted to you in the applicable license terms for the Apple-eligible content and shall not constitute a grant, waiver, or other limitation of any rights of Apple or any other copyright owners in any Apple-eligible content. You are not authorized to deploy your caching-enabled Mac with the content caching features enabled on a network you do not own or control, or which you are not legally authorized to use for such purposes, or to permit access to such Apple-eligible content from end users outside of your home, company, or organization. You agree to only use the content caching features for your own personal, non-commercial use or for internal use within your company or organization, and only as expressly permitted herein. You may not provide a service to third parties that integrates with or leverages services or information provided by the content caching features or uses the content caching features in any way. 5. By enabling the content caching features of the Apple software, you agree that Apple may store, monitor, and secure the Apple-eligible content on your caching-enabled Mac and may collect and use technical information about your caching-enabled Mac and related networks, including but not limited to hardware identifiers and IP addresses for such purposes. You agree not to disable, disrupt, hack, circumvent, or otherwise interfere with Apple's verification, storage, or authentication mechanisms, digital signing, digital rights management, or other security mechanisms implemented in or by the Apple software, services, the Apple-eligible content, or other Apple software or technology, or to enable others to do so. 6. Apple reserves the right to stop making Apple-eligible content available for caching on your caching-enabled Mac, e.g. some content that you may have previously cached may not be available for subsequent caching, and to remove any cached Apple-eligible content from your caching-enabled Macs at any time in its sole discretion, and Apple shall have no liability to you in such event. You understand that such caching of Apple-eligible content may not be available in all countries or regions. You may remove the cached Apple-eligible content and disable the content caching features at any time. I. Remote desktop connections. Subject to the terms and conditions of this license, remotely connecting from another computer or electronic device, each a device, to an Apple-branded computer that is running the Apple software for purposes of this section. Such Apple-branded computers referred to as the Home Mac, whether through the screen sharing feature or through any other means. I. Only one device may remotely connect at any one time, whether directly or indirectly, to control the desktop session of the Apple software that is running and being displayed on the Home Mac, and II, a reasonable number of devices may remotely connect at the same time for the sole purpose of simultaneously observing the same graphical desktop session of the Apple software that is running and being displayed on the Home Mac, as long as they do not control the Apple software in any way. But III, only one Apple-branded device may remotely connect at any one time, whether directly or indirectly, to control a separate graphical desktop session of the Apple software that is different from the one running and being displayed on the Home Mac, and such connection may be only made through the screen sharing feature of the Apple software. Except as expressly permitted in Section 2I or Section 3, except as otherwise licensed by Apple, you agree not to use the Apple software or any of its functionality in connection with the service bureau, time sharing, terminal sharing, or other similar types of services, whether such services are being provided within your own organization or to third parties. J. Other use restrictions. The grants set forth in this license do not permit you to, and you agree not to, install, use, or run the Apple software on any non-Apple branded computer, or to enable others to do so. You agree not to remove, obscure, or alter any proprietary notices, including trademark and copyright notices, that may be affixed to or contained within the Apple software, except as otherwise permitted by the terms of this license or otherwise licensed by Apple. 1. Only one user may use the Apple software at a time, and 2. You may not make the Apple software available over a network where it could be run or used by multiple computers at the same time, except as precisely permitted in Section 3. You may not rent, lease, lend, sell, redistribute, or sub-license the Apple software. K. Backup copy. You may make one copy of the Apple software, excluding the boot ROM code and other Apple firmware that is embedded or otherwise contained in the Apple-branded hardware, in machine-readable form for backup purposes only, provided that the backup copy must include all copyright or other proprietary notices contained in the original. Apple boot ROM code and firmware is provided only for use on Apple-branded hardware, and you may not copy, modify, or redistribute the Apple boot ROM code or firmware or any portions thereof. L. Migration of existing software. If you use the Setup Migration Assistant to transfer software from one Apple-branded computer to another Apple-branded computer, please remember that the continued use of the original copy of the software may be prohibited once a copy has been transferred to another computer, unless you already have a licensed copy of such software on both computers. You should check the relevant software license agreement for applicable terms and conditions. Third-party software and services may not be compatible with this Apple software, and installation of this Apple software may affect the availability and usability of such third-party software or services. M. Open source. Certain components of the Apple software and third-party open source programs included with the Apple software have been or may be available by Apple on its open source website at this link. Collectively, the open source components link. You may modify or replace only these open source components, provided that 1. The resultant modified Apple software is used in place of the unmodified Apple software on Apple-branded computers you own or control, as long as each such Apple computer has a properly licensed copy of the Apple software on it, and 2. You otherwise comply with the terms of this license and applicable licensing terms governing use of open source components. Apple is not obligated to provide any updates, maintenance, warranty, technical, or other support or services from the resultant modified Apple software. You expressly acknowledge that if failure or damage to the Apple hardware results from modification of the open source components of the Apple software, such failure or damage is excluded from the terms of the Apple hardware warranty. And no reverse engineering. You may not, and you agree not to, or enable others to, copy extras expressly permitted by this license or the usage rules if they are applicable to you, decompile, reverse engineer, disassemble, attempt to derive the source code of, decrypt, modify, or create derivative works of the Apple software or any services provided by the Apple software or any part thereof, except as and only to the extent of any foregoing restriction is permitted by the applicable law or by licensing terms governing use of open source components that may be included with the Apple software. O. Compliance with laws. You agree to use the Apple software and the services as defined in Section 6 below in compliance with all applicable laws, including local laws of the country or region in which you reside, or in which you download or use the Apple software and services. Features of the Apple software and the services may not be available in all languages or regions, and some features may vary by region. An internet connection is required for some features of the Apple software and services. P. Third-party software. Apple has provided as part of the Apple software package and may provide as an upgrade, update, or supplement to the Apple software access to certain third-party software or services as a convenience. To the extent that the Apple software contains or provides access to any third-party software or services, Apple has no express or implied obligation to provide any technical or other support for such software or services. Please contact the appropriate software vendor, manufacturer, or service provider directly for technical support and customer service related to its software, service, and/or products. Q. Apple software changes. The Apple software will periodically check with Apple for Apple software changes. If a change is available, the change may automatically download and install onto your computer and, if applicable, your peripheral devices. By using the Apple software, you agree that Apple may download and install automatic Apple software changes onto your computer and onto your peripheral devices. You can turn off automatic operating system updates and rapid security responses at any time by adjusting the settings found within System Settings, Software Update Advanced. R. System characters. Subject to the terms and conditions of this license, you may use the emoji characters included in or created with the Apple software system characters I while running the Apple software, and II to create your own original content and products for your personal non-commercial use. No other use of the system characters is permitted by this license, including but not limited to the use, reproduction, display, performance, recording, publishing, or redistribution of any of the system characters in a profit, non-profit, public sharing, or commercial context. 3. Leasing permitted developer services. A. Leasing. You may lease or sublease a validly licensed version of the Apple software in its entirety to an individual organization, each a leasee, provided that all of the following conditions are met. 1. The leased Apple software must be used for the sole purpose of providing permitted developer services, and each leasee must review and agree to be bound by the terms of the license. 2. Each lease period must be for a minimum period of 24 consecutive hours. 3. During the lease period, the end-user leasee must have sole and exclusive use and control of the Apple software and the Apple-branded hardware on which it is installed, except that you, as the party leasing the Apple software, leaseor, may provide administrative report for the Apple software. And 4. Prior to using the Apple software, the end-user leasee must review and agree to be bound by the terms applicable to any software pre-installed in the Apple software, including but not limited to Apple's Xcode developer software and any of their Apple or third-party software. For purposes of this section, A, end-user leasee, means a leasee who is the end-user ultimately using the leased Apple software solely for permitted developer services, and B, permitted developer services means continuous integration services, including but not limited to software development, building software from source, automated testing during software development, and running necessary developer tools to support each such activities. Each leaseor must provide Apple with advance notice prior to leasing or subleasing the Apple software pursuant to this section 3 by contacting Apple Developer Relations at this link. B. Subleasing. A leasee may further sublease the Apple software pursuant to this section 3, provided that such leasee complies with all the terms of this section 3. A leasee subleasing the Apple software, who shall also be considered a leaseor under this section 3, must fully relinquish exclusive use and control of the Apple software and the Apple-branded hardware on which it is installed to its leasee during the lease period. C. Enforcement. As a leaseor, you should be responsible for 1. Ensuring that each leasee complies with the requirements of this section 3, 2. Ensuring each leasee agrees to all applicable license terms, and 3. Assisting Apple in enforcing compliance therewith. If a leasee breaches this license or other applicable Apple license terms, their rights to use the Apple software shall automatically terminate, and you agree to immediately terminate such leasee's use of the Apple software upon your discovery of such breach, or upon written notice from Apple of such breach. D. Virtualization. For each copy of the Apple software subject to a lease under the section 3, either a leaseor or a leasee, but not both, may install, use, and run additional copies or instances of the Apple software within virtual operating system environments in accordance with section 2B3, provided that a leaseor may only virtualize a single instance or copy of the Apple software as a provisioning tool for the purposes of providing a leasee with access to and use of the Apple software pursuant to this section 3. E. System configuration. If you are a leasee, you acknowledge that the Apple software may have been previously configured by the leaseor who is leasing the Apple software to you, including the selection of settings for analytics, location services, and other security, privacy, and data collection related features. You acknowledge and agree that Apple is not responsible for the configuration of the Apple software by the leaseor. 4. Transfer. A. If you obtain this Apple software pre-installed on Apple-branded hardware, or if you obtained your license to the Apple software from the Mac App Store through a software update, you may make a one-time permanent transfer of all of your license rights to the Apple software in its original form as provided by Apple to another party, provided that 1. The Apple software is transferred together with your Apple-branded hardware. 2. The transfer must include all the Apple software, including all its component parts in this license. 3. You do not retain any copies of the Apple software, full or partial, including copies stored on a computer or other storage device. And 4. The party receiving the Apple software reads and agrees to accept the terms and conditions of this license. For purposes of this license, if Apple provides an update, e.g. version 10.14 to 10.14.1 to the Apple software, the update is considered part of the Apple software and may not be transferred separately from the pre-update version of the Apple software. B. You may not transfer any Apple software that has not been modified or replaced under Section 2 and above. All components of the Apple software provided as part of a bundle and may not be separated from the bundle and distributed as standalone applications. Note that the Apple software provided with a particular Apple-branded hardware product might not run on other models of Apple-branded hardware. C. Any copy of the Apple software that may be provided by Apple for promotional, evaluation, diagnostic, or restorative purposes may be used only for such purposes and may not be resold or transferred. 5. Consent to use of data. When you use the various communication features of the Apple software, such as iMessage and FaceTime with your computer, the Apple ID information you provide, your email addresses, certain unique identifiers for your computer, and your phone's telephone number are sent to Apple in order to allow others to reach you. When you use iMessage, Apple may hold your messages in encrypted form for a limited period of time in order to ensure their delivery. You may turn off FaceTime or iMessage by going to the FaceTime messages setting on your Mac. Certain features like analytics, location services, Siri, dictation, and Spotlight may require information from your computer to provide their respective functions. When you turn on or use these features, details will be provided regarding what information is sent to Apple and how the information may be used. You can learn more by visiting this link. At all times, your information will be treated in accordance with Apple's privacy policy, which can be viewed at this link. 6. Services and third-party materials. A. General. The Apple software may enable access to Apple's iTunes Store, Mac App Store, Apple Books, Game Center, iCloud, Maps, News, and other Apple and third-party services and websites, collectively and individually services. Use of these services requires internet access, and use of certain services may require an Apple ID, may require you to accept additional terms, and may be subject to additional fees. By using the software in connection with an Apple ID or other Apple services, you agree to the applicable terms of service for that service, such as the latest Apple Media Services terms and conditions for the country or region in which you access such services, which you may access and review at this link. B. If you sign up for iCloud, certain iCloud features like iCloud Drive, My Photo Stream, Shared Albums, and Find My may be accessed directly from the Apple software. You acknowledge and agree that your use of iCloud and these features is subject to the latest terms and conditions of the iCloud service, which you may access and review at this link. C. News app content. Your use of content access through the news application is limited solely to personal, non-commercial use, does not transfer any ownership interest to you in the content, and specifically excludes without a limitation any commercial or promotional use rights in such content. D. Maps. The map services and features of the Apple software, including map data coverage, may vary by region. Details will be provided regarding what information is sent to Apple and how the information will be used. You acknowledge and agree that your use of maps is subject to the latest terms and conditions of the map service, which you may access and review on the sidebar of the Maps application. E. You understand that by using any of the services, you may encounter content that may be deemed offensive, indecent, or objectionable, which content may or may not be identified as having explicit language, and that the results of any search or entering of a particular URL may automatically and unintentionally generate links or references to objectionable material. Nevertheless, you agree to use the services at your sole risk, and that Apple, its affiliates, agents, principals, or licensors will have no liability to you for content that may be found offensive, indecent, or objectionable. F. Certain services may display, include, or make available content, data, information, applications, or materials from third parties, or provide links to a certain third-party website. By using the services, you acknowledge and agree that Apple is not responsible for examining or evaluating the content, accuracy, completeness, timeliness, validity, copyright compliance, legality, decency, quality, or any other aspect of such third-party materials or websites. Apple, its officers, affiliates, and subsidiaries do not warrant or endorse and do not assume and will not have any liability or responsibility to you or any other person for any third-party services, third-party materials, or websites, or for any other materials, products, or services of third parties. Third-party materials and links to other websites are provided solely as a convenience to you. Neither Apple nor any of its content providers guarantees the availability, accuracy, completeness, reliability, or timeliness of stock information, location data, health information, or any other data displayed by any services. Financial information displayed by any services for general informational purposes only should not be relied upon as investment advice. Before executing any securities transaction based upon information obtained through the services, you should consult with a financial or securities professional who is legally qualified to give financial or securities advice in your country or region. Location data provided by any services, including the Apple Map services provided for basic navigational and/or planning purposes only, is not intended to be relied upon in situations where precise location information is needed, or where erroneous, inaccurate, time-delayed, or incomplete location data may lead to death, personal injury, or property or environmental damage. You agree that the results you receive from the map service may vary from actual road or terrain conditions due to factors that can affect the accuracy of the maps data, such as but not limited to weather, road and traffic conditions, and geopolitical events. For your safety, always pay attention to posted road signs and current road conditions. Follow safe driving practices and traffic regulations, and note that cycling and walking directions may not include designated pathways. H. To the extent that you upload any content through the use of the services, you represent that you own all rights in or have authorization on or are otherwise legally permitted to upload such content, and that such content does not violate any terms of service applicable to the services. You agree that the services contain proprietary content, information, and material that is owned by Apple, the site owner, or the licensors, and is protected by applicable intellectual property and other laws, including but not limited to copyright. You agree that you will not use such proprietary content, information, or materials other than for permitted use of the services or in any manner that is inconsistent with the terms of the license or that infringes any intellectual property rights of a third party or Apple. No portion of the services may be reproduced in any form or by any means. You agree not to modify, rent, lease, loan, sell, distribute, or create derivative works based on the services in any manner, and you shall not exploit the services in any unauthorized way whatsoever, including but not limited to using the services to transmit any computer viruses, worms, Trojan horses, or other malware, or by trespass or burdening network capacity. You further agree not to use the services in any manner to harass, abuse, stalk, threaten, defame, or otherwise infringe or violate the rights of any other party, and that Apple is not in any way responsible for any such use by you, nor for any harassing, threatening, defamatory, offensive, infringing, or illegal messages or transmissions that you may receive as a result of using any of the services. In addition, such services and third-party materials may not be available in all languages or in all countries or regions. Apple makes no representation that such services and third-party materials are appropriate or available to use in any particular location. To the extent you choose to use or access such services or third-party materials, you do so at your own initiative and are responsible for the compliance with any applicable laws, including but not limited to applicable local laws and privacy and data collection laws. Apple and its licensors reserve the right to change, suspend, or remove or disable access to any service at any time without notice. In no event will Apple be liable for the removal or disabling of access to any such services. Apple may also impose limits on the use of or access to certain services in any case and without notice or liability. 7. Termination. This license is effective until terminated. Your rights under this license will terminate automatically or otherwise cease to be effective without notice from Apple if you fail to comply with any terms of this license. Upon termination of this license, you will cease all use of Apple software and destroy all copies, full or partial, of the Apple software. Sections 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, and 14 of this license shall survive any such termination. 8. Disclaimer of warranties. A. If you are a customer who is a consumer, someone who uses the Apple software outside of your trade, business, or profession, you may have legal rights in your country of residence which will prohibit the following limitations from applying to you, and where prohibited, they will not apply to you. To find more about rights, you should contact a local consumer advice organization. B. You expressly acknowledge and agree that to the extent permitted by applicable law, use of the Apple software and any services provided by or access to the Apple software is at your own sole risk and that the entire risk as to satisfactory quality, performance, accuracy, and effort is with you. C. To the maximum extent permitted by applicable law, the Apple software and services are provided as is and as available, with all faults and without warranty of any kind, and Apple and Apple's licensors, collectively referred to as Apple for the purposes of Sections 8 and 9, hereby disclaim all warranties and conditions with respect to the Apple software and services, either express, implied, or statutory, including but not limited to the implied warranties and or conditions of merchantability, satisfactory quality, fitness for a particular purpose, accuracy, quiet enjoyment, and non-infringement of third-party rights. D. Apple does not warrant against interference with your enjoyment of the Apple software and services, that the functions contained in or service performed or provided by the Apple software will meet your requirements, that the operation of the Apple software and services will be uninterrupted or error-free, that any services will continue to be made available, that defects in the Apple software and services will be corrected, or that the Apple software and services will be compatible to work with any third-party software, applications, or third-party services. Installation of this Apple software may affect the availability and usability of third-party software, applications, or third-party services, as well as Apple products and services. E. You further acknowledge that the Apple software and services are not intended or suitable for use in situations or environments where the failure or time delays of, or errors or inaccuracies in the content, data, or information provided by the Apple software and services could lead to death, personal injury, or severe physical or environmental damage, including without limitation, the operation of nuclear facilities, aircraft navigation or communication systems, air traffic control, life support, or weapon systems. F. No oral or written information or advice given by Apple or an Apple authorized representative shall create a warranty. Should the Apple software or services prove defective, you assume the entire cost of all necessary servicing, repair, or correction. Some jurisdictions do not allow the exclusion of implied warranties or limitations on applicable statutory rights of a consumer, so the above exclusion and limitations may not apply to you. 9. Limitation of liability. To the extent not prohibited by applicable law, in no event shall Apple, its affiliates, agents, or principals be liable for personal injury or any incidental, special, indirect, or consequential damages whatsoever, including without limitation, damage for loss of profits, corruption or loss of data, failure to transmit or receive any data information, including without limitation, course instructions, assignments, and materials, business interruption, or any other commercial damages or losses arising out of or relating to your use or inability to use the Apple software or services or any third-party software, applications, or services in connection with the Apple software or services, however caused, regardless of the theory of liability, contract, tort, or otherwise, and even if Apple has been advised of the possibility of such damages, some jurisdictions do not allow the exclusion or limitations of liability for personal injury or incidental or consequential damages, so this limitation may not apply to you. In no event shall Apple's total liability to you for all damages other than that may be required by applicable law in cases involving personal injury exceed the amount of $250. The foregoing limitations will apply even if the above stated remedy fails of its essential purpose. 10. Digital certificates. The Apple software contains functionality that allows it to accept digital certificates either issued from Apple or from third parties. You are solely responsible for deciding whether or not to rely on a certificate, whether issued by Apple or a third party. Your use of digital certificates is at your sole risk. To the maximum extent permitted by applicable law, Apple makes no warranties or representations, express or implied, as to merchantability or fitness for any particular purpose, accuracy, security, or non-infringement of third-party rights with respect to digital certificates. You agree that A. You will not falsify or misuse any certificate. B. You will use digital certificates for legal purposes only in accordance with the applicable certificate policy, certificate practice statement, or other certificate authority business practice disclosures. C. You are solely responsible for preventing any unauthorized use from making use of your digital certificates. D. You are solely responsible for preventing any unauthorized use from making use of the private key associated with digital certificate. And E. You will revoke any of your certificates that you have reason to believe have been compromised. Apple certificate policy and certificate practice statements may be found at this link. 11. Export control. You may not use or otherwise export or re-export the Apple software except as authorized by United States law and the laws of the jurisdictions in which the Apple software was obtained. In particular, but without limitation, the Apple software may not be exported or re-exported A. Into any U.S. embargoed countries, or B. To anyone on the U.S. Treasury Department's list of specially designated nationals, or the U.S. Department of Commerce denied persons list or entity list, or any other restricted party list. By using the Apple software, you represent and warrant that you are not located in any such country or on any such list. You also agree that you will not use the Apple software for any purpose prohibited by United States law, including without limitation the development, design, manufacture, or production of missiles, nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. 12. Government end users. The Apple software and related documentation are commercial items, as that term is defined at 48 CFR 2.101, consisting of commercial computer software and commercial computer software documentation, as such terms are used in 48 CFR 12.212 or 48 CFR 227.7202 as applicable, consistent with 48 CFR 12.212 or 48 CFR 227.7202.1 through 227.7202.4 as applicable. The commercial computer software and commercial computer software documentation are being licensed to U.S. government end users, A. only as commercial items, and B. with only those rights as are granted to all other end users pursuant to the terms and conditions herein. Unpublished. Rights reserved under the copyright laws of the United States. 13. Controlling law and severability. This license will be governed by and constructed in accordance with the laws of the state of California, excluding its conflict of law principles. This license shall not be governed by the United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, the application of which is expressly excluded. If you are a consumer based in the United Kingdom, this license will be governed by the laws of the jurisdiction of your residence. If for any reason a court of competent jurisdiction finds any provision or portion thereof to be unenforceable, the remainder of this license shall continue in full force and effect. 14. Complete agreement governing language. This license constitutes the entire agreement between you and Apple relating to the Apple software and supersedes all prior contemporaneous understandings regarding such subject matter. No amendment to or no modification of this license will be binding unless in writing and signed by Apple. Any translation of this license is done for local requirements, and in the event of a dispute between English and any non-English versions, the English version of this license shall govern to the extent not prohibited by local law in your jurisdiction. Yahoo Search Service restrictions. The Yahoo Search Service, available through Safari, is licensed for use only in the following countries and regions: Argentina, Aruba, Australia, Austria, Barbados, Belgium, Bermuda, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Cayman Islands, Chile, China Mainland, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Colombia, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Grenada, Guatemala, Hungary, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Ireland, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Malta, Mexico, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Puerto Rico, Romania, Singapore, Slovakia, Slovenia, South Korea, Spain, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, the Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkey, UK, Uruguay, US, and Venezuela. Apple Pay supplemental terms and conditions. These Apple Pay supplemental terms and conditions, the supplemental terms, supplement the software license agreement for macOS, the license. Both the terms of the license and the supplemental terms govern your use of the Apple Pay feature, which shall be deemed a service under the license. Capitalized terms used in the supplemental terms have the meaning set forth in the license. 1. Overview and use restrictions. Apple Pay allows you to store virtual representations of credit, debit, and prepaid cards, including Apple Card, that are supported by the Apple Pay feature. Use supported Macs to initiate or make payments with websites, and track online orders and view receipts. The Apple Pay features of the Apple software may only be available in select regions with select card issues, payment networks, and merchants. Features may vary by region, issuer, and merchant. Supported cards may change from time to time. Apple Pay is intended for your personal use, and you may only provision your own supported cards. If you're provisioning a supported corporate card, you represent that you are doing so with the authorization of your employer, and you're authorized to bind your employer to these terms of use in all transactions affected by use of this feature. You agree not to use Apple Pay for illegal or fraudulent purposes or any other purposes that are prohibited by the license and these supplemental terms. You further agree to use Apple Pay in accordance with applicable laws and regulations. You agree not to interfere with or disrupt the Apple Pay service, including accessing the service through any automated means, or any servers or networks connected to the service, or any policies, requirements, or regulations of networks connected to the service, including any unauthorized access to, use, or monitoring of data or traffic thereon. 2. Use on Macs. You can use Apple Pay on supported Macs to initiate payments on websites accessed through Safari. This feature requires you to have a supported card that has been provisioned to a supportive iOS device or Apple Watch. When you check out from a website using Apple Pay, you will be required to authorize the transaction using a supported device. In addition to the terms set forth in these supplemental terms, your use of Apple Pay to initiate payments on websites accessed through Safari is subject to the Apple Pay supplemental terms and conditions applicable to your supported devices, the terms of which are hereby incorporated by reference and which can be accessed by going to Settings, General, About, Legal License from your iOS device, or About, Legal License from the Watch app on a paired iOS device. Supported devices may change from time to time. On the MacBook Pro with built-in Touch ID, you can set up Apple Pay by provisioning supported cards and using Apple Pay to make payments on websites accessed through Safari. In order to use Apple Pay on these Macs, you must have supported cards that are associated with an active iCloud account. Apple Pay is available only to individuals aged 13 years or older and may be subject to additional age-based restrictions imposed by iCloud or the relevant card issue of your supported cards. 3. Apple's relationship with you. Apple does not process payments or have any other control over payments, returns, refunds, rewards, value, discounts, orders, order fulfillment, or commerce activity that may arise out of your use of this feature. The terms of cardholder agreements you may have in place with your card issuer will continue to govern your services, your supported cards, and their use in connection with Apple Pay. Similarly, your purchase of any goods or services using the Apple Pay feature will be subject to the merchant's terms and conditions. Apple Card is only available within the United States and is issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch Apple Card issuer. When you apply for Apple Card, you are applying to open an account with the Apple Card issuer. Apple Card is only available to individuals aged 18 years or older depending on your state of residence. The financial institution responsible for offering Apple Card is subject to change, and your use of Apple Card is subject to the terms and conditions. Nothing in the license or these supplemental terms modifies the terms of any cardholder or merchant agreement or other terms and conditions applicable to the use of features of Apple Pay, and such terms will govern your use of the applicable feature of Apple Pay and their virtual representation on your supported Mac. You agree that Apple is not a party to your cardholder or merchant agreements, nor is Apple responsible for the A. Content, accuracy, or unavailability of any payment cards, commerce activities, transactions, purchases, orders, order fulfillment, or receipts while using Apple Pay functionality. B. Issuance of credit or assessing eligibility for credit. C. Activities of issuers, merchants, or other third parties related to your use of Apple Pay or wallet. D. Provisioning decisions made by an issuer, merchant, or other third party in connection with the awarded card. E. Accrual or redemption of rewards or stored value under a merchant's program. Or F. Funding or reloading of prepaid cards. For all disputes or questions about payment cards or associated commerce activity, please contact your issuer or the applicable merchant. 4. Privacy. When using Apple Pay to initiate a payment transaction to be completed on a supported device, Apple Pay will transfer payment information in an encrypted format between your Mac and your supported device to complete your transaction. When using Apple Pay to make a payment transaction on a MacBook Pro with built-in Touch ID, your Apple payment information will be provided in an encrypted format to the website as part of that transaction. When adding a card to Apple Pay on a MacBook Pro with built-in Touch ID, information about your device, such as whether certain device settings are enabled and device use patterns, e.g. percent time devices in motion, approximate number of calls per week, will be sent to Apple to determine your eligibility and to prevent fraud. You can find detailed information on the personal information collected, used, or shared as part of your use of Apple Pay by redeeming relevant service-specific privacy notices, including by Apple Pay and Privacy, which can be accessed on your iOS device or Mac, or within the Watch app on a paired iOS device, or by visiting this link. By using Apple Pay, you agree and consent to Apple's and its subsidiaries and agents' transmission, collection, maintenance, processing, and use of all the foregoing information to provide Apple Pay functionality. 5. Security. Apple Pay stores virtual representations of your supported cards, and you understand and acknowledge that providing your device passcode or password to a third party or allowing a third party to add their fingerprint to use Touch ID on your supported device or Mac may result in their ability to make Apple Pay payments within websites on your Mac. You are solely responsible for maintaining the security of your devices and the applicable passcodes and passwords. You agree that Apple does not have any responsibility if you lose or share access to your device or if you make unauthorized modifications to macOS. If your device is lost or stolen and you have Find My iPhone or Find My Mac enabled, you can use the Find iPhone or this link to attempt to suspend the ability to pay with the virtual supported cards on the device by putting it into lost mode. You can also erase your device, which will attempt to suspend the ability to pay with the virtual supported cards on the device. You should also contact the card issuer of your supported cards in order to prevent unauthorized access to your virtual supported cards. If you report or Apple suspects fraudulent or abusive activity, you agree to cooperate with Apple in any investigation and to use any fraud prevention measures we prescribe. 6. Limitation of liability. In addition to the disclaimers of warranties and limitation of liability set forth in the license, Apple does not assume any liability for purchases, payments, transactions, orders, order fulfillment, receipt information, or other commerce activity made using the Apple Pay feature, and you agree to look solely to agreements you may have with your card issuer, payment network, or merchant to resolve any questions or disputes relating to your supported cards, virtual supported cards, and associated commerce activity. And that's it. My brain is kind of dead. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, definitely consider liking and subscribing. It helps a lot. Leaving a comment. It's so good to see you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, have a great night, okay?